He calls himself a master barber. But David Foley is also a master of manipulation.
He was such a smooth talker.
Very good con man. He's a pro.
He always spoke a wonderfully large game.
For years, Foley has been grooming financial victims all over southeastern Wisconsin.
He builds a relationship. He looks at somebody. He figures them out real quick.
He created the illusion that he was a wealthy entrepreneur, driving luxury cars that other people paid for, and renting $400,000 homes he passed off as his own.
He always had these addresses that were wonderful addresses, you know, over in Elm Grove and, you know, Brookfield.
It's an image Foley used to persuade investors.
It's a done deal. I mean, the guy's affluent. Put your chin there and your forehead. Oh, wait for it.
Brian Weaver is an optometrist by trade, but in 2007, he was focused on investing his savings in a hot new business deal. And that's when he met Foley.
I funded everything, 100%.
Weaver laid out more than $100,000 to open a sports-themed barbershop in Brookfield. Foley cut the hair, but it was Weaver who paid the bills. And before long, he says Foley started racking up personal expenses on a company credit card.
Chiropractic purchases, a big screen TV, you know, just unbelievable things. You know, we were suddenly paying for car repairs, you know, $2,700 for a car repair without any bills, you know.
When Weaver confronted him, Foley got a restraining order that barred Weaver from his own business.
Oh my God almighty. It was just mind-boggling.
Turns out David Foley is a con man with a criminal record that dates back to 1980. He's been convicted at least 10 times for identity theft, fraud, and passing worthless checks.
State of Wisconsin versus David Foley.
But the most serious charges yet stem from events that occurred after he opened an upscale barbershop in Whitefish Bay.
Bring your son along, and his haircut is free.
When Foley launched the new Sportin' Cuts in 2010, he hired Lance Gordon to keep an eye on the books.
He would always spend way, way more than was coming in.
Gordon says Foley was more interested in recruiting new members for one of his many multi-level marketing ventures, selling energy drinks, weight loss coffee, and prepaid legal services.
What do barbers do? They talk. What do people complain about? I don't have any money. I know a way you can make some. He had it down to an art.
Foley took advantage of some of those recruits using their credit cards without their knowledge. But his biggest financial victim may have been the man who bankrolled the barbershop.
I basically gave him all the money.
Rick Bystra poured his life savings into Sportin' Cuts in part because of false claims Foley made about a financial windfall that was coming his way.
He wanted you to think he was good for the money.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
In 2010, Foley got a $136,000 settlement from the state for false imprisonment, but he's accused in federal court records of doctoring the settlement letter to make it appear he was due nearly 10 times that amount, then showing that letter to investors.
He said, even if the barbershop doesn't make it, I've got over $1 million coming.
So it was pretty much a no-brainer.
Instead, Foley wrote a series of checks on accounts that didn't exist, some of them for as much as $10,000, and Bystra had to cover them.
It was apparent that he was involved in what appeared to me to be a check-kiting scheme.
Milwaukee County Prosecutor Bruce Landgraf has called Foley the quintessential confidence man with an insatiable desire for easy money. But even he could not have predicted what would happen next.
I think he may have said when this comes out, it's going to be all over the news.
In August of 2010, Foley is accused of sending this anonymous letter to the Fox 6 investigators, along with an unlabeled DVD. The disc contained a single folder labeled Andy Garrison Private Files. Inside the folder, dozens of images of child pornography. State investigators say it was part of an elaborate setup.
He, in effect, tried to create the image that Mr. Garrison, Andrew Garrison, was a possessor of child pornography, and perhaps worse than that.
Garrison was Foley's landlord for the Sportin' Cuts in Whitefish Bay, and court records show Foley owed him $55,000 in rent, and Garrison was planning to testify against him in the check fraud case.
Mr. Foley was intent on making me and the judge who sentenced him in the 2008 case believe that Mr. Garrison was not credible.
His plan backfired. State investigators traced the child porn back to Foley, and soon after, 2 young boys came forward to say Foley had molested them.
Sick. Evil.
This man is, quite frankly, the personification of the devil as far as I'm concerned.
The news came as a special shock to Weaver, who still believed until recently one of Foley's tallest tales.
And the fact that he has his own 2 sons. He had 2 boys.
Did you know that he doesn't? He doesn't have children. Those aren't his kids.
Oh my God in heaven.
For years, Foley had told his friends and business partners that he was a widowed father of 2 boys. At times, he introduced other people's children as his own. It wasn't until Bystra called Foley's brother in New York that he says he finally got the truth.
And it took probably about 15 seconds for him to stop laughing. And he said, Dave's never been married. He has no kids.
Oh my God, I had pictures of the boys with Macaulay Culkin and such. Oh.
All part of the scheme, apparently.
Oh my God in heaven.
Foley is now facing state charges of bail jumping and federal charges of producing child pornography and transporting a minor across state lines to engage in a sex act. Meanwhile, Rick Bystra is trying to pick up the pieces of his shattered dreams, struggling to tell his own kids why they can't afford life's little luxuries.
You try to be strong when you're talking to them, but your heart, bleeds. Hurts.
And wishing he'd never met David Foley.
He was a great barber. Just was not a good person.
Bring your son along, and his haircut is free.
When David Foley started promoting his new sports-themed barbershop in Whitefish Bay a couple of years ago, he seemed to place special emphasis on attracting children. But until a few months ago, he'd never been accused of committing a child sex crime.
His father wasn't coming around.
This single mom, we'll call Mary, just wanted a mentor for her 12-year-old son.
And you wanted him to have a male figure in his life?
Right.
Big brothers, big sisters eventually matched her son with Foley.
I thought they knew what they were doing.
She did not expect her little boy to be paired with a con man who's been arrested dozens of times for theft, fraud, and issuing worthless checks. By the time Foley applied to be a big brother in 2006, he already had 3 felony convictions in Wisconsin.
What would you have said if they told you that he has a criminal record dating back to 1980?
I would have said, forget it. Because I want my child to be safe.
Mary was initially impressed with Foley, but grew increasingly uncomfortable as he showered her son with gifts and started making unusual requests.
Like begging for my son to stay overnight, and I'm like, no. When does a man of this age beg for a child to stay overnight at somebody else's house?
The relationship ended in 2009 when Foley was sent to prison for check fraud. But it wasn't until March of last year that the boy told an agent for the Wisconsin Department of Justice that Foley had touched him downstairs. A devastating revelation for a mother who was simply trying to do something good for her child. Foley is now facing federal child pornography charges.
He should burn in hell forever for what he's done.
But Mary's anger is not limited to the man accused of fondling her son.
Whoever is at the other end of big brothers and big sisters to protect children, there's no protection.
Just want to know if we could sit down with somebody and talk about...
Amy's not available to talk, and we are making no comment.
Big Brothers Big Sisters of Metro Milwaukee declined repeated requests for an on-camera interview, saying they cannot comment on an ongoing criminal case. In a phone call, however, CEO Amy Kiankio told me they do both local and national criminal history checks on every applicant, and she says sex offenders are automatically screened out. But if an applicant has any other type of felony, even multiple felonies, that alone is not enough to disqualify him. She says it's just one factor they consider, along with references and home visits.
If it was me protecting somebody on the door would have been slammed in his face, then I would have called the police and asking, why is this guy trying to get in here?
Other chapters of Big Brothers Big Sisters appear to have more stringent requirements. For instance, one in Washington state requires that an applicant must not have been convicted of a felony in the past 7 years. Another says no felonies in the past 5 years. And a chapter in Louisiana requires no prior felonies at all.
Nobody will talk to me just about the background check procedures in general?
Meanwhile, Mary is still struggling to come to grips with what happened.
I feel like they robbed my child of their innocence, my son's innocence of his lifetime. because you grew up and you trust people. Well, they stole that from my son.